It was supposed to be a routine delivery. Rain hammering the streets, neon lights bleeding through the downpour, the roar of her bike engine swallowing the city's noise. Elise Grant had learned long ago to keep her head down, make the drop, collect the payment, disappear. But tonight, the drop point was different. She pulled into an alley behind a restaurant most people didn't know existed. The kind of place where reservations were made in whispers and paid for in silence. As she killed the engine, two voices drifted through a cracked window above her, low, urgent, speaking in clipped Korean. She shouldn't have listened. Every instinct screamed at her to leave. But then she heard a name, Choi Musok, and a time, midnight, the penthouse. Her breath caught. Everyone in the city knew that name. The Korean Mafia boss who controlled everything from the docks to the diamond district. The man politicians feared and rivals didn't live long enough to challenge twice. They were going to kill him. Elise's hands trembled on the handlebars. She could pretend she never heard it. Finish her route, go home. Survive another day in a city that chewed up people like her and spit out the bones. Instead, she checked her delivery manifest. One package left. Destination, the glass tower. Penthouse suite. Recipient, C.M. Sok. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 20 minutes later, Elise stood in a private elevator lined with gold mirrors, watching her rain-soaked reflection rise toward the clouds. The package felt heavier in her hands. Security had waved her through. Just another invisible courier in a city full of ghosts. The doors opened to suffocating luxury. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the drowning city. And seated with his back to her, framed against the rain-streaked glass like a statue carved from ice and power, was Choi Musok himself. He didn't turn around. "Leave it on the table," he said, voice cold, dismissive. Elise's mouth went dry. She could walk away. Should walk away. But she thought of the voices in the alley, the casual certainty with which they discussed his death. And something in her. Something reckless. Something that refused to let another person become just another body the city swallowed. Made her move forward. She violated every rule. She crossed the invisible boundary between servant and king. She leaned down, close enough to feel the expensive cologne mixed with the faint scent of whiskey. Close enough to see his jaw tighten in surprise. Her hand covered her mouth as she whispered 3 words that stopped his heart. "They're watching you." Musok's entire body went still, dangerously still, the kind of stillness that precedes violence. Slowly he turned his head. His eyes, sharp, calculating, merciless, met hers. Most people couldn't hold his gaze for more than a second. Elise didn't look away. "Who are you?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Nobody," she breathed. "Just someone who heard something she wasn't supposed to hear." For 3 seconds, the only sound was rain hammering against bulletproof glass. Then Musok stood, and Elise understood why men with guns feared this man who wore suits instead of armor. But he didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't call security. Instead, he asked the question that would change both their lives forever. What exactly did you hear? What happened next would rewrite the city's entire power map. Stay until the end to see how a delivery driver with nothing became the only person a mafia kingpin could trust, and how a single whispered warning ignited a war that would burn the underworld to ash. Elise Grant was 28 years old, though the city had aged her in ways a mirror couldn't show. Poverty has a way of making people invisible, turning bright futures into survival routines, making dreams quieter until they disappear entirely. She'd been a courier for 3 years, ever since the accident that killed her mother and left her with medical debt that would take a lifetime to repay. The delivery routes were her kingdom now. Every back alley, every shortcut, every blind spot in the city's surveillance grid memorized like a prayer. She survived by being nobody, by moving through the world like smoke, until the night she chose to be seen. Choi Musok didn't build his empire by trusting whispers from strangers. He built it by eliminating problems before they became threats, by reading people faster than they could lie, by never ever letting his guard down. Yet here stood a soaking wet courier in a cheap jacket, lit rain still dripping from her hair onto his marble floor, telling him his life was in danger with eyes that held no fear, only certainty. Most people who entered his presence couldn't breathe properly. They stammered, they sweated, they avoided his gaze like prey, avoiding a predator's stare. This woman did none of those things. "Midnight," Elise said quietly, her voice steady despite the thunder of her pulse. "Your head of security. He's meeting with the Kozlov syndicate tomorrow at dawn to collect payment. They're calling it the changing of the guard." Musok's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened imperceptibly on the arm of his chair. Lee Jin-woo. His right hand for 8 years. The man who'd taken a bullet for him in Busan. The man who knew every safe house, every escape route, every weakness in his armor. If she was right, he was already dead. If she was lying, she would be. "How did you hear this?" he asked, his accent faint but present, each word measured like currency. "Wrong place, wrong time," Elise said. "I make deliveries everywhere. Sometimes people forget we exist." That, Musok understood perfectly. Invisibility was a weapon he'd used himself before power made him impossible to ignore. He studied her, the worn boots, the frayed backpack strap, the way she stood like someone ready to run but choosing not to. She wasn't here for money. Blackmailers didn't warn their targets. Assassins didn't give speeches. She was here because she'd made a choice. And choices, Musok knew, revealed everything about a person's character. "Why tell me?" he asked. "You could have stayed silent. Safer that way." Elise's jaw tightened. For a moment something raw flickered across her face, something that looked like old grief, old anger at a world that took and never gave back. "Because I'm tired of watching people die when someone could have said something," she said. "And because you're going to die at midnight if you don't listen." The rain intensified outside, sheets of water distorting the city lights into abstract paintings of gold and red. Musok's world was one of absolutes: loyalty or betrayal, power or weakness, breathing or buried. There was no room for sentiment, no space for mercy. But there was always room for useful intelligence. He reached for his phone, pressed a single button. "Jinwoo, my office, now." Elise's eyes widened slightly. "You're going to confront him?" "I'm going to confirm what you've told me," Musok said, his voice colder than the rain outside. "And if you're lying, you won't leave this building alive. If you're telling the truth." He paused, really looking at her for the first time. This woman who delivered packages through a city that chewed up the vulnerable. Who'd risked everything to warn a man she'd never met. "If you're telling the truth, then you've just declared war on people who kill witnesses for breakfast. Which means, Miss Nobody, your invisible life just ended." The elevator chimed. Footsteps approached. Musok gestured to the shadows behind his desk. "Hide, don't make a sound, and pray you're as good at reading danger as you think you are." Elise moved without hesitation, melting into the darkness like she'd been doing it her whole life. The door opened. Lee Jin-woo stepped inside, smiling, loyal, perfect, and Musok prepared to find out which one of them would survive the next 5 minutes. 4 hours earlier, Elise had been having a normal night. Well, normal for someone whose job involved navigating the city's most dangerous neighborhoods with nothing but a helmet and hope. The delivery app pinged. Package pickup at Chen's Imports, drop off at the Lotus Garden restaurant. $15 plus tip. She'd done this route 100 times. The rain started as she pulled up to Chen's. Not the gentle kind that cleaned the streets, but the violent kind that turned gutters into rivers and made every traffic light look like a watercolor painting bleeding into concrete. She grabbed the sealed package, barely glancing at the label. Rule number 1 of courier work: don't ask questions. Rule number 2, don't look inside. Rule number 3, get paid and disappear. The Lotus Garden sat wedged between a shuttered pawn shop and a building whose windows had been dark for years. The kind of restaurant that didn't advertise, didn't have a sign in English, didn't want customers who needed directions. Elise had delivered here before. Always to the kitchen entrance. Always cash tips. Always men in expensive suits who barely acknowledged her existence. She pulled into the alley behind the building, killed the engine. The rain hammered her helmet like bullets. Through the downpour, she could see the kitchen door's dim red light, the universal signal for deliveries. But as she dismounted, voices drifted from the cracked window above, low and urgent, cutting through the rain's white noise. She should have knocked, should have made noise, should have announced herself like always. But something in the tone, the careful quiet of it, the tension, made her freeze. Midnight, not a minute sooner. The voice was speaking English with a heavy Russian accent. He leaves the office at 11:45 every Tuesday, takes the private elevator, 47 seconds alone. And the security chief? Another voice, Korean, clipped, clinical. Already paid. He'll disable the cameras at 11:42. The penthouse guards will be called to a fake incident on the 15th floor. You'll have exactly 90 seconds. Elise's breath caught. She pressed herself against the wet brick wall, invisible in the shadows and rain. The Choi Empire dies at midnight, the Russian continued, and by dawn, the waterfront belongs to Kozlov, the Diamond District to Park, the politicians to whoever pays fastest. And Lee Jin-woo? The Korean voice asked. He gets what was promised? 10 million in Busan, a generous retirement for betraying his boss. Laughter, cold, certain, the laughter of men who'd already won. Choi Moo-seok has ruled this city for 8 years, the Russian said. Tonight, he becomes a memory. Make it clean, make it quiet, make it look like he never saw it coming. Elise's heart slammed against her ribs. She knew that name. Everyone knew that name. The Korean boss who controlled half the city's underground economy. The man politicians whispered about in closed sessions. The ghost who turned enemies into obituaries. They were going to kill him. She looked down at the package in her trembling hands. The delivery label read, CM Sok, Glass Tower Penthouse, deliver by 11 p.m. The coincidence hit her like ice water. She could leave. Should leave. This wasn't her world, wasn't her problem. She was nobody, just a courier trying to survive in a city that crushed people like her every single day. But her mother's voice echoed in her memory, the last words she'd spoken before the accident. Baby, silence is how evil wins. Sometimes being nobody means you're the only one who can do something. Elise stared at the package, at the address, at the clock on her phone showing 10:17 p.m. 43 minutes until someone delivered death to a man who didn't know it was coming. She made a choice that should have gotten her killed. She got back on her bike, left the package at the kitchen door unsigned, and rode straight into the storm toward the glass tower, toward the most dangerous man in the city, toward midnight. The glass tower didn't welcome people like Elise. It tolerated them. The cleaners, the delivery drivers, the maintenance workers who kept the machinery of wealth running smoothly while remaining conveniently invisible. She parked her bike in the service area, rain streaming down her visor. 11:03. 37 minutes until midnight. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The service entrance was controlled by a bored security guard who barely glanced up from his phone as she held up the package and her courier ID. He waved her through without a word. First barrier cleared. The service elevator smelled like bleach and old coffee. Elise pressed the button for the penthouse level, watching the floors tick upward. 15th floor. 20th. 30th. Each number felt like a countdown to her own execution. What was she doing? She was nobody. A delivery driver with $93 in her bank account and a studio apartment she could barely afford. Choi Moo-seok didn't know she existed. After tonight, if she survived, he'd make sure she wished she still didn't. The elevator chimed, 40th floor. But she kept thinking about those voices in the alley. The casual certainty of murder. The way they'd laughed about it like they were planning a dinner reservation instead of an execution. 47th floor. The penthouse level. The doors opened onto luxury that didn't belong in the same city as her life. Marble, gold, silence so complete it felt like walking into a vacuum. 2 guards stood flanking massive double doors, hands resting near concealed weapons. Delivery for Mr. Choi, Elise said, forcing her voice steady. The larger guard frowned. Nothing scheduled. Last-minute request, check your system. He did, suspicious but following protocol. The package had been logged in downstairs. The system showed it was legitimate. After 8 seconds that felt like 8 hours, he nodded toward the doors. Leave it inside. Don't touch anything. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look at him directly. Elise nodded, not trusting her voice. The doors opened. She stepped into another world. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the drowning city. Rain hammered the glass like it was trying to break through, to drag everyone back down to the streets where they belonged. And there, seated with his back to her like a king who'd never needed to watch his own door, was Choi Moo-seok. Leave it on the table, he said without turning. Voice like winter, dismissive, absolute. Elise's feet moved toward the designated table. She could set it down, walk away, let fate handle the rest. She'd done her part just by showing up. She'd tried, but trying wasn't the same as saving. Her mother's face flashed in her mind. The hospital, the machines, the doctor saying if someone had called sooner, if someone had noticed, if someone had done something. Elise crossed the invisible line. She moved past the table, past the boundary of servant and master, past every rule that kept people like her alive in worlds like his. She leaned down, close enough to smell expensive cologne and whiskey, close enough to feel him tense with surprise. Her hand covered her mouth, partly to muffle the sound, partly because her lips were trembling. "They're watching you," she whispered. The world stopped. Musok went absolutely still. Not the stillness of relaxation. The stillness of a predator deciding whether to strike. He turned his head slowly. Their eyes met. Most people looked away from Choi Musok within seconds. Elise held his gaze because looking away felt like abandoning him to the darkness waiting at night. "Who are you?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper but sharp as a blade. "Nobody," Elise breathed. "Just someone who heard something she wasn't supposed to hear." Rain hammered the windows. Lightning fractured the sky. And in that moment, Elise Grant stopped being invisible. For better or worse, she just stepped into the light. Lee Jin-woo entered the penthouse with the easy confidence of a man who'd done it 1,000 times before. Loyal, trusted, smiling that familiar smile that had survived firefights and boardroom wars. "Boss, you called?" He spoke in Korean, respectful but casual. 8 years of friendship embedded in those 3 words. Musok studied him from behind his desk, expression unreadable. Behind him, hidden in the shadows near the bookshelf, Elise barely breathed. Her heart hammered so loud she was certain everyone could hear it. "Status report on tomorrow's shipment," Musok said calmly, switching to English, a deliberate choice that made Jin-woo's eyes flicker with brief confusion. "Everything's secure. The route is clear, guards are briefed." Jin-woo's smile didn't waver, but something in his posture shifted. Minute, almost invisible. "Why? Is there a problem? Should there be?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Jin-woo's hand drifted almost imperceptibly toward his jacket. Not quite reaching. Not yet. But the intention was there, a shadow of movement that screamed guilt louder than any confession. Musok saw it, Elise saw it, and Jin-woo realized in that terrible half-second that he'd been caught. Time crystallized. Jin-woo's hand moved toward his concealed weapon. Then the world exploded. The window behind Musok's desk detonated inward in a spray of bulletproof glass and rain. The crack of the sniper rifle came a microsecond later, the sound chasing the bullet that had already punched through the reinforced window. 11:47, 13 minutes early. Musok moved on pure instinct, diving sideways as the bullet struck his chair's headrest exactly where his skull had been 2 seconds earlier. Leather and foam erupted. The round buried itself in the wall, smoking. Jin-woo's gun cleared his jacket, not aimed at the window, aimed at Musok. "You should have stayed ignorant," Jin-woo said, all pretense of loyalty evaporating like steam. "Nothing personal, boss, just business." Elise didn't think. Thinking would have paralyzed her. She grabbed the heavy glass sculpture from the shelf beside her and hurled it with every ounce of desperate strength. It struck Jin-woo's shoulder just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wild, punching into the marble floor instead of Musok's chest. Jin-woo spun toward her, eyes widening as he registered the courier he'd barely noticed downstairs. "You." Musok was already moving. He crossed the distance between them in 3 steps, faster than a man in a tailored suit should move, and drove his fist into Jin-woo's throat. The gun clattered to the floor. Jin-woo dropped, gasping, choking. Another window shattered, then another. Sniper fire raking the penthouse from multiple angles. They'd planned for Musok to be alone, immobilized, an easy target. Instead, chaos. Musok grabbed Elise's wrist, yanking her away from the windows. "How many shooters?" I don't know," her voice cracked. "They said midnight. They said 90 seconds alone." They moved the timeline. His grip was iron, but not cruel, protective. He pulled her behind his desk as another round punched through where they'd been standing. "Because someone warned me. Someone they didn't account for." Glass rained down like deadly snow. Alarms shrieked. Emergency lights bathed everything in red. Musok looked at Elise, really looked at her. This rain-soaked courier who'd thrown her life away to save his. This woman who had absolutely no reason to care whether a mafia boss lived or died. "The service elevator," she gasped. "Cameras are down. They wanted you alone in the main elevator. You know the building layout? I deliver here twice a week. I know every back way, every. Then you're going to get us out." It wasn't a question. Because right now, you're the only person in this entire city I can trust. Jinwoo groaned on the floor, still breathing. Barely. Musok didn't spare him a second glance. He grabbed his phone, his gun from the desk drawer, and Elise's hand. "Run," he said. And together, they disappeared into the city's hidden veins. The service corridor was a different world. Narrow, fluorescent lit, smelling of industrial cleaner and old pipes. The architecture of invisibility that kept buildings like the glass tower running while the wealthy pretended it all happened by magic. Elise led, Musok right behind her, his expensive shoes silent on the concrete floor. Behind them, shouts echoed. Jinwoo's backup had arrived, flooding the penthouse. They had minutes at most. Here. Elise yanked open a maintenance door most people wouldn't notice, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. Fire escape route. Leads to the mechanical sublevel. Musok didn't hesitate. He dropped through first, landing in a crouch, gun drawn, scanning the shadows. Elise followed, her courier instincts kicking in, the same instincts that had kept her alive in back alleys and bad neighborhoods for 3 years. The sublevel was a maze of pipes and machinery, the building's guts exposed and humming. Steam hissed from joints. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. The ambient noise was perfect cover, but it also meant they couldn't hear anyone following. "They'll lock down the main exits," Musok said quietly, staying close. "Security protocols. Good thing we're not using the main exits." Elise moved through the mechanical forest like she'd mapped it in her sleep. Because she had. Every delivery person learned the hidden routes, the ways to move through buildings without bothering the people who mattered. She navigated past the boiler room, through a junction where 3 tunnels met, then down a passage so narrow they had to move single file. Musok's presence behind her was solid, controlled. He wasn't panicking, wasn't questioning. He'd made a decision to trust her, and men like him didn't second-guess survival instincts. "There's a loading dock on the east side," Elise whispered. "Delivery trucks come through between 11 and 1. There should be." Footsteps. Above them, the clang of a door being kicked open. They froze. Elise pressed herself against the cold pipe beside her. Musok's hand found her shoulder, not restraining, but communicating. "Stay still. Stay quiet." Voices filtered through the ceiling grating. Russian accent. "Check the maintenance levels." He couldn't have gone far. "What about the woman?" Another voice. Korean. "Kill her too. No witnesses. Kozlov's orders." The footsteps moved past, fading into another corridor. Elise realized she'd been holding her breath. She exhaled slowly, and Musok's grip on her shoulder tightened briefly. Acknowledgement, maybe even reassurance. "They know about me," she breathed. "You violated their perfect plan," Musok said flatly. "That makes you dangerous, which means you're mine to protect now." It should have sounded possessive. Instead, it sounded like a promise. They kept moving. Elise led them through a drainage tunnel that smelled like rust and old rain, then up a ladder that emerged behind a dumpster in the loading area. The storm was still raging, turning the alley into a river. Elise's motorcycle sat exactly where she'd left it, rain-slicked and anonymous. "You're joking," Musok said, staring at the bike. "You have a better idea?" Elise threw him the spare helmet. "They're looking for a mafia boss in a suit, not a couple on a delivery bike." Sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights painted the street. Musok looked at the helmet, then at her, then at the city trying to kill them both. For the first time since she'd met him, something almost like a smile touched his face. Dark, grim, but real. "Where are we going?" Elise kicked the engine to life, somewhere they'll never think to look. He climbed on behind her, and together they disappeared into the rain-soaked streets. A king without a throne and a courier without a route, riding into the maze only she knew how to navigate. Elise drove like the city was a living thing she'd learned to read in a language Musok had forgotten existed. She didn't take main streets or highways. Instead, she wove through alleys barely wide enough for the bike, cutting through parking garages and under overpasses where the homeless had built kingdoms from cardboard and tarps. She knew which turns had cameras and which didn't, which routes the police monitored and which they'd abandoned to entropy. This was her world. The city beneath the city. The places powerful men never saw. They ended up in a neighborhood Musok recognized only from crime reports. Warehouses converted into makeshift housing, buildings the city had stopped maintaining decades ago. Elise pulled into a narrow space between two structures, killed the engine, and the sudden silence felt louder than the storm. "We can rest here for a few hours," she said, removing her helmet. Rain had plastered her hair to her face, but her eyes were sharp, alert. Nobody asks questions in this neighborhood. Nobody calls the cops, and nobody knows who you are. Musok looked around. Graffiti covered every surface. Broken windows had been patched with plastic and duct tape. A few people moved in the shadows, watching, wary, but not interfering. In his world, this would be called a slum. In Elise's world, it was called Tuesday. She led him up a fire escape to a third-floor window that opened easily, clearly used before. Inside was a small apartment, studio-sized, sparse but clean. A mattress on the floor, a hot plate, a few changes of clothes hanging from a rope stretched across the room. "Your place?" Musok asked. "One of them." Elise locked the window behind them, pulled the curtain shut. "I keep a few spots around the city. Safe houses, I guess you'd call them. Places to crash between deliveries when going home isn't worth the gas money." She moved through the tiny space with practiced efficiency, pulling out 2 bottles of water, a first aid kit, a burner phone. Survival infrastructure built from nothing. Musok had built an empire from violence and strategy. He commanded armies of soldiers, owned politicians, made decisions that moved millions of dollars with a phone call. But watching Elise navigate her world with the same precision he used in boardrooms, he realized something uncomfortable. She was powerful in ways he'd forgotten existed. "How long have you been living like this?" he asked. Elise paused, water bottle halfway to her lips. 3 years as a courier. Before that? She shrugged. "Does it matter?" "It matters if I'm going to understand why you risked everything for someone you've never met." She was quiet for a moment, staring at the rain-streaked window. When she spoke, her voice carried old grief, old anger. "My mom died because nobody helped. Car accident, middle of downtown, rush hour. Dozens of people walked past. Nobody called 911 until it was too late." Her jaw tightened. "I watched this city teach me that invisible people don't matter. That if you're not rich or connected or important, you can die on the sidewalk and people will step over you." She looked at him then, eyes fierce. "So when I heard them planning to kill you, I didn't see a mafia boss. I saw another person this city was going to swallow. And I'm so tired of watching people disappear." Musok had spent 8 years surrounding himself with soldiers, advisors, strategists, people who served him out of fear or greed or ambition. Not one of them would have thrown their life away to save his. But this woman, this nobody with nothing, had done exactly that. "You could have died tonight," he said quietly, "multiple times. So could you." "I'm used to it. So am I." Elise handed him a water bottle. "Difference is, you chose this life. I just got dealt these cards." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, the city hunting them both now. Musok took the water, their fingers brushing briefly. "When this is over, when I've reclaimed what's mine, you won't go back to being invisible. You understand that?" "Yeah." Elise smiled, tired but real. "I figured that out around the time the sniper started shooting." For the first time in years, Choi Musok felt something close to gratitude. Dawn broke gray and merciless over the city. Musok had spent the night making calls on burner phones, reaching out to the few people in his organization he knew hadn't been compromised. Not many, but enough. Elise watched him work from her perch by the window, marveling at how quickly he'd adapted. The penthouse king had become a strategist in a slum apartment, plotting his counterstrike with nothing but a cheap phone and absolute certainty. "They think I'm dead or running," Musok said, ending another call. "Kozlov's already moving to claim the waterfront. Park is positioning for the Diamond District. They're carving up my empire like I'm already a corpse." "So we make them think they've won," Elise said. She'd been thinking about this all night, about the one advantage they had. Until it's too late. Musok looked at her with those sharp, calculating eyes. "You have a plan. You said it yourself." I'm the variable they didn't account for. Nobody knows who I am, what I look like to them. I'm still just a courier. She pulled out her phone, opened the delivery app. And couriers go everywhere, see everything, deliver anything. Understanding flickered across his face. You want to use your network. Every delivery person in this city knows things we're not supposed to know. We see meetings, overhear conversations, deliver packages to places that don't officially exist. Elise pulled up her contact list. Dozens of other couriers, drivers, runners. The invisible army that kept the city moving. We talk, share routes, warn each other about dangerous clients. We're ghosts, but we're connected ghosts. Mushok stood, moving to stand beside her. What are you proposing? We send packages. Fake ones. Time-sensitive deliveries to everyone involved in the betrayal. Kozlov's lieutenants, Park's advisors, the politicians on their payroll. Make it look like urgent communications from their co-conspirators. Luring them to a central location, Mushok finished, his voice carrying dark satisfaction. Somewhere I control. Somewhere they'll feel safe, Elise corrected. The old Port Authority warehouse. It's been abandoned for years. No surveillance, neutral territory. Perfect for a victory meeting. For the next 3 hours, they orchestrated the trap with surgical precision. Elise contacted couriers she trusted, paid them cash to deliver sealed packages marked urgent and confidential. Each package contained a simple message on expensive letterhead written in the appropriate language. Final arrangements. Port Authority Warehouse 7, 3 p.m. Come alone. Confirm Choi's elimination. The beauty was its simplicity. Each conspirator would think the message came from their allies. Each would assume the others had called the meeting. Each would come expecting to finalize their victory. Instead, they'd find Mushok waiting. By noon, confirmation started rolling in through surveillance row. Mushok's loyal soldiers had established. Kozlov's right hand had received the package. So had Park's chief enforcer, the corrupt police captain, the city councilman who'd been bought and paid for, all of them taking the bait. They'll bring security, Mushok said, checking his weapon with practiced efficiency. This won't be clean. Nothing about this has been clean, Elise countered. She'd acquired her own protection, a small pistol from one of the couriers, someone who understood that sometimes the city demanded you defend yourself. But we have something they don't. What's that? They think they're walking into a celebration. Elise's smile was sharp, feral. We know we're walking into war. Mushok looked at her, this woman who'd been invisible 72 hours ago and now stood beside him planning an ambush that would redraw the city's power structure. Something shifted in his expression. Respect. Recognition. When this is over, he said quietly, you're never delivering packages again, unless you want to. When this is over, Elise replied, I want to make sure people like me don't stay invisible anymore. The clock ticked toward 3 p.m. The trap was set. 3 weeks later, Elise stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of the glass tower penthouse. The same windows that had shattered under sniper fire, now replaced and bulletproof once more. The city sprawled below her, glittering and indifferent. The same city that had tried to make her invisible her entire life. She wasn't invisible anymore. The courier network is reporting increased police presence in the Eastern District, she said, scrolling through messages on a tablet that cost more than her old motorcycle. 3 of our delivery routes have been compromised. I'm recommending we shift operations to the subway tunnels for the next 48 hours. Mushok sat at his desk, the same desk he'd nearly died behind, reviewing reports from his newly purged organization. He'd rebuilt his empire with ruthless efficiency, but this time with a foundation that couldn't be bought or broken. Loyalty wasn't enough anymore. He demanded competence, vision, the ability to see threats others missed. He'd found all 3 in a delivery driver who'd risked everything to whisper a warning. Approved, he said without looking up. Coordinate with Kim, he'll provide security for the new routes. This was their rhythm now. Mushok handled the empire's visible face, the negotiations, the territorial agreements, the delicate dance of power that kept the city's underworld in balance. Elise handled what she'd always handled. The invisible networks, the street-level intelligence, the early warnings that kept them 3 steps ahead of everyone else. She'd become his eyes on the ground, his connection to a world he'd lost touch with years ago. Not a lieutenant or an enforcer, but something the organization had never had before. A conscience with teeth. The door opened. Min-jun, Musok's new head of security, vetted personally by Elise after she'd spent 2 weeks investigating his entire life, entered with a tablet of his own. The waterfront consolidation is complete, he reported in Korean, then switched to English out of respect for Elise. Kozlov's remaining operations have been absorbed or eliminated. No resistance. Good. Musok signed off on a document. And the political situation? The new city councilman is more cooperative than his predecessor. Min-jun allowed himself a thin smile, especially after the previous councilman's very public confession about corruption. Elise had orchestrated that too. Not with violence, but with evidence. Hours of recorded conversations, financial records, proof of betrayals that even the media couldn't ignore. The councilman was now serving 15 years. His replacement knew exactly who really ran the city and was smart enough to work with them rather than against them. There's one more thing, Min-jun said, addressing Elise directly now. The Courier Association wants to meet with you. They're calling you the voice. They want protection, better pay, safer routes. Elise looked at Musok. He nodded, almost imperceptibly. Set up the meeting, she said. Tell them we're listening. After Min-jun left, silence settled over the penthouse. Outside, rain began to fall. Not the violent storm of that first night, but a gentle wash that cleaned the streets without drowning them. Regret it yet? Musok asked, finally looking up from his work. Elise thought about her old studio apartment, the endless delivery routes, the invisibility that had once felt like safety. She thought about the motorcycle rides through rain and danger, about being nobody in a city that crushed people like her every single day. No, she said honestly. But I haven't forgotten where I came from either. Good. Musok stood, moving to stand beside her at the window. That's why you're here. The moment you forget is the moment you become what we destroyed. They stood there together, a mafia kingpin and a former courier, watching over a city that had tried to kill them both and failed. The power map had been redrawn, not just in territory and influence, but in who held the pen. They're still watching, you know, Elise said quietly, echoing the words that had started everything. The city, the rivals, everyone waiting for us to make a mistake. Musok's reflection smiled in the glass. Rare, genuine, dangerous. Let them watch, he said. This time we're watching back. Below them, delivery drivers navigated the rain-slicked streets, carrying packages to places others feared to go. Invisible armies moving through a city that would never be the same. And high above it all, Elise Grant, once nobody, now somebody, stood guard over the kingdom she'd helped save. The seat beside the throne was no longer empty, and the invisible had finally been seen. 2 months after the warehouse, the city had learned to whisper a new name alongside Choi Musok's, Elise Grant, the woman who'd emerged from nowhere to stand at the right hand of power. The penthouse had become something different now. Still luxurious, still commanding the skyline, but no longer the isolated fortress it had been. Elise had insisted on changes. Secure communication lines to the courier networks, direct feeds from street-level informants, windows into the city's underbelly that Musok's previous regime had ignored. She sat in a chair that hadn't existed 3 weeks ago, positioned at an angle to his desk so they could work side by side. Not subordinate, not equal. Something else entirely. Complementary pieces of a machine that had learned to run on both power and truth. The Delivery Workers Union finalized the contract, Elise said, reviewing the terms on her tablet. Better wages, health coverage, and guaranteed safety protocols. In exchange, they provide us with real-time intelligence on unusual activity in their routes. Musok signed off on another restructuring order. The other syndicates will call it weakness, paying couriers like employees instead of disposable assets. Let them. Elise's smile was sharp. While they're laughing, we'll know about every shipment, every meeting caught, every move they make before they make it. Information isn't weakness. It's the only currency that matters. He paused, looking at her with an expression that still surprised her sometimes. Respect tinged with something that might have been affection, if men like Musok allowed themselves such vulnerabilities. You've changed the game, he said quietly. Built an intelligence network in 8 weeks that my previous advisors couldn't build in 8 years. I didn't build it. It was always there. Elise set down the tablet. You just needed someone who remembered what it was like to be invisible to show you how to see it. The intercom buzzed. Minjin's voice. Boss, the territorial meeting starts in 20 minutes. Representatives from the Italians, the Irish, and the Vietnamese are already here. Musok stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced precision. The king preparing for court. But this time, when he moved toward the door, he paused. You're coming, he said. Not a question. Elise had attended these meetings before, always in the background, always observing. But today felt different. Today, Musok gestured to the chair beside his at the head of the conference table. The other crime lords noticed immediately. Eyes widened. Whispers rippled through the room. A woman, a black woman who'd been a delivery driver months ago, sitting in the position traditionally reserved for a second-in-command, a consigliere, a partner. Salvatore Benedetti, the Italian representative, couldn't hide his smirk. Choi, you're bringing your courier to negotiate territory? Musok's expression didn't change. Miss Grant has intelligence you don't, eyes where you're blind, and the respect of networks you don't even know exist. He sat down, utterly calm. Disrespect her, and you disrespect me. The room went silent. Elise met Benedetti's gaze without flinching. The eastern waterfront, she said, her voice steady and clear. You've been moving product through courier routes without permission. That ends today. Benedetti's smirk vanished. How did you? I know every delivery made in this city, Elise continued. Every package, every route, every driver. You want to operate here. You coordinate with us. Otherwise, your shipments start disappearing. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact, delivered with the same calm certainty she'd used to warn Musok about the assassination. The meeting proceeded with a new understanding. The invisible girl had become impossible to ignore. Later, as the representatives filed out, Musok remained seated, watching Elise organize her notes with the same efficiency she'd once used to sort delivery packages. They'll target you now, he said. You know that. They already did. Elise looked up, unflinching. The moment I whispered in your ear, I became a target. The difference now is I have the power to fight back. And if you could go back, Musok asked, back to being invisible, safe, anonymous? Elise thought about the rain-soaked streets, the endless routes, the feeling of being a ghost in her own life. She thought about her mother's words. Sometimes being nobody means you're the only one who can do something. She'd done something, and in doing it, she'd become someone. I can't go back, she said simply. Neither of us can. We rewrote the map together. Musok nodded, something like satisfaction crossing his features. Then we move forward. Together. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Delivery bikes weaving through traffic, couriers carrying secrets, invisible people moving through a world that was finally learning to see them. And in the glass tower, two people who should never have met stood side by side, watching over an empire built not just on fear, but on the strength of those the city had tried to erase. The throne had two seats now, and the invisible had conquered the kingdom,